On a gray afternoon in early spring, rain slid down the cafe's wide glass windows in long, winding streaks, each droplet tracing its own uncertain path like a tear searching for a place to fall. The clouds outside hung low, pressing against the rooftops, and the sky seemed unwilling to offer even a hint of blue. Inside, the little cafe was a cocoon of muted warmth, the low hum of conversation blending with the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine, the occasional clink of porcelain cups, and the faint scent of roasted coffee beans that lingered in the air. At a corner table near the window, a young woman sat motionless in her wheelchair, the soft pink sleeves of her sweater pulled down over her trembling fingers. Her gaze was fixed on the table in front of her, where a small white birthday cake rested, 22 candles flickering softly, their flames dancing and bending each time the front door opened and closed with the arrival of another stranger seeking refuge from the rain. The candles glowed stubbornly against the draft, each one a tiny soldier refusing to surrender to the wind. Outside, the city moved on with its usual rhythm, indifferent to the quiet moment unfolding inside. Taxis sent ripples through puddles, umbrellas bobbed and swayed in a parade of colors, and pedestrians hurried along with collars turned up against the chill. Yet within the cafe, time seemed to hold its breath. The young woman's eyes lingered on the cake, perfectly frosted, untouched, its scent of vanilla mingling with the sharper notes of coffee in the air. There were no friends gathered around, no laughter to mark the occasion, no soft chorus of "Happy Birthday" to break the stillness. Just her, the candles, and the steady whisper of rain against the glass. Her name was Whitmore, a name that carried weight in the city, whispered in boardrooms, printed in society pages, spoken with a mix of admiration and envy. She was the daughter of one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, a man whose empire stretched across industries and continents. To the world, she appeared to have everything: wealth, influence, beauty. But the truth, as she sat alone on her birthday, was that she had never felt more empty. 3 years earlier, a single rainy night had rewritten her life in the span of seconds. The car accident had left her paralyzed from the waist down, and with it, had stolen the life she once knew. Before that night, she had been the embodiment of movement, always in motion, dancing under the glow of streetlights, chasing sunsets with her camera in hand, her laughter a melody that drew people in. But now, those days felt like fragments from a dream she could no longer return to. In the years since the accident, her world had been carefully constructed around her, an expensive, clinical sort of care, a sprawling home staffed by people who were paid to be there, and a father whose presence was little more than a shadow passing between flights and meetings. The pity in people's eyes had replaced the admiration she once saw, and slowly, the invitations to gatherings, dinners, and celebrations had dwindled to nothing. Even on this day, her birthday, she had nurtured a quiet hope that someone, anyone, might surprise her. But the table beside her remained empty, the cake before her still uncut, the candles burning for no one but herself. Then, as if the rain had decided to offer her a moment of interruption, the cafe door opened again. A man stepped inside, shaking droplets from his dark hair, his coat damp and clinging to his frame. In one hand he carried a small paper bag, its top folded neatly, and in the other he held the door for the little girl who followed close behind. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with a yellow dress now speckled with darker spots where the rain had found her, and white shoes that had clearly lost their battle with the puddles outside. In both hands she carried a single cupcake, its frosting crowned with a tiny, wobbly star that threatened to tip with each step. Her big, curious eyes swept across the room as if searching for a safe harbor in the sea of occupied tables. They moved together through the cafe, their presence quiet but somehow noticeable. The man's eyes caught on Whitmore for just a fraction of a second, long enough to acknowledge her before flicking away, though something in that glance felt different from the polite avoidance she was used to. The little girl, however, didn't look away. She stared openly, not at the wheelchair, but at the glowing candles on the cake in front of her, her brows knitting slightly as if trying to solve a puzzle. And in that brief, unspoken exchange, Whitmore felt the first flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, not hope exactly, but the possibility of being seen. The man stepped further into the cafe, his flannel shirt worn thin at the cuffs and his jeans faded but clean, as if both had been through enough years to carry quiet stories of their own. He scanned the room with a casual glance, his eyes sweeping past tables where couples leaned close over shared pastries, past lone readers lost in the soft rustle of newspaper pages. Then his gaze caught on her. Something about the way she sat, still, almost suspended in time, held him in place. She wasn't merely looking at the birthday candles, she was staring at them as if they were the last stars she might ever see, as if blowing them out would mean letting go of something she wasn't ready to release. He could have taken the empty table in the far corner, could have carried on with his day as planned, but some quiet pull rooted him there. The rainwater dripping from his coat sleeve cooled against his wrist as he hesitated, unable to look away. Era didn't notice them at first. Her thoughts were far from the here and now, pulled instead into the deep undertow of memory, back to the night of the accident, to the months of endless physical therapy, to the slow erosion of friendships that once felt unshakable. She thought of the phone call from her father, his voice clipped but polite, telling her he had to catch a flight for an urgent meeting, on the very birthday she had pleaded for him to stay. She had learned that day not to expect anyone to anchor her. Birthdays had become less about celebration and more about survival. Markers of time she no longer trusted, reminders that the years were passing while she remained still. It wasn't until a flash of yellow entered her peripheral vision that Era's focus shifted. The small figure of a girl, 7 at most, was weaving her way carefully between chairs. Her yellow dress, softened by the damp of the rain, clung lightly to her knees, and her white shoes carried the stains of puddles bravely crossed. In her tiny hands she held a cupcake, its frosting topped with a precarious star of cream that wobbled with each step. Just behind her came the man, now holding 2 steaming paper cups of coffee, his long fingers wrapped around them with a certain care. He stopped beside the girl, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. Era glanced up, startled, unsure if this was real or simply a daydream breaking the monotony. The cafes seemed to hush in their presence. The soft hiss of the espresso machine faded into the background, and even the rain outside slowed to a quiet drizzle. Era's breath caught in her chest, a strange mix of wariness and curiosity rising within her. She almost convinced herself she had imagined them, that the ache in her heart had conjured this little scene just to ease the weight of solitude. But then the man spoke, his voice deep but warm, carrying a steady kindness that made her lift her gaze fully to meet his eyes. "Would you mind if we joined you?" he asked. The words were simple, but in the silence that surrounded her, they landed with the force of a tide against stone. She hesitated, only a second or two, then nodded, her voice caught somewhere between surprise and acceptance. They settled into the chairs opposite her. The girl set her cupcake on the table as if placing a small treasure in a safe place, then leaned forward, her big brown eyes glancing between Era and the cake with all its glowing candles. "Why 22? The girl asked, her tone light but genuinely curious. "That's my mommy's favorite number." Era blinked, the corners of her mouth lifting faintly for the first time that day. She introduced herself, and the girl told her name, Sophie, while the man introduced himself simply as Daniel. Daniel didn't speak much at first. He sipped his coffee slowly, his eyes attentive, as though giving her the space to lead the conversation at her own pace. Sophie, on the other hand, had no such patience for silence. She asked about the cake, about birthdays, about whether Era liked rain or sunshine better. Her chatter was unfiltered, and notably, she never mentioned the wheelchair, not once. Her questions danced around the space like ribbons in the air, untangling some of the tension that had wound tight in Era's chest for years. Somewhere between the warmth of the coffee and the sweetness of shared frosting, Era found herself speaking, really speaking, for the first time in a long while. She told them about the accident in halting sentences at first, about the way her life had slowed until it felt like she was living underwater. She admitted she didn't know how to find her way back to joy, how the days bled into one another in shades of gray. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression open and steady, the kind of listening that asked for nothing in return. Sophie tilted her head as if each word was something worth keeping, her small hands cupping the air as though she might hold Era's story inside them. The hours slipped away unnoticed. The rain outside thinned until the clouds broke, revealing the first shy streaks of sunset. Light spilled into the cafe, brushing the tables in a warm gold that made the lingering steam from their cups glow. There was laughter now, soft, real laughter, threaded between sips of coffee and crumbs of cake. Era realized she hadn't checked the clock once. When Daniel and Sophie finally stood to leave, it didn't feel like the ending of something, but the beginning of a chapter she hadn't thought she'd ever write again. As they left, Sophie turned back and waved, her little hands slicing through the golden light. Daniel's eyes met Era's for one last moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They didn't promise to meet again, yet Era knew she would remember this day, the way two strangers had stepped into her solitude and left her with more than just company. They had left her with proof that even after years of darkness, color could return to the faded corners of a heart.